and some outlines, but mainly it's about getting these guys to talk a little bit about how this process has evolved for them over the years. And we'll give examples and we'll touch at the end on a couple of the games that are going on now. First of all, I know a lot of shows talk about where are you from, where we can find your work and stuff at the end of the show, but I'm not waiting till the end of the show. So I want to start with Tyler. Talk about, where you've been, where people can talk, find you, and how you've evolved in the field over the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's been pretty, as we were talking about here before we started recording, it's been a pretty quick rise, I think, on my part, because 3 years ago, I didn't even have any paid opportunities in the betting space. I'm grateful that I was fortunate enough that I built a relationship with Doug Lamarice, who was at Cleveland.com. He gave me an opportunity to join him weekly on his Ohio State specific podcast, Buckeye Talk, where we did a betting show. And then that I piggybacked that into, now I'm at VSiN.com. I write 4 articles a week there, doing all sports, college football, NFL, men's and women's college basketball, WNBA. So I kind of do it all there. And then I'm back with Doug on a weekly show called Bets of the North, which you can find on YouTube and podcast platforms. But yeah, 3 years ago, I was just kind of a guy with a spreadsheet shouting into the universe. And now I have at least a little bit of a platform, and happy and honored to be here with you guys today.
Tommy, talk a little bit about your process and your evolution in terms of getting into not just the Twitter space, but you have a wonderful podcast that I found, and it's short and sweet and right to the point.
Yeah, well, I started going on podcasts about 7-8 years ago, just, starting to be guests on podcasts, talking baseball, football, things of that nature. But, my betting experience started, I'm going to age myself here, 33 years ago. Road trips to Vegas here from Southern California. And really, when you talk about going to the school of hard knocks in terms of sports betting, that's really what I did. I was as square as a square could be in my early days, and really took a beating, to be honest. And then, after a while, you get tired of taking a beating, and you try to find ways to evolve as a sports bettor. And as I matured, I did. And really, when Twitter came along, that helped a lot. Thought I'd start, doing a podcast, not only to share my experiences with people, but it's really made me a better handicapper as well. So it's just been an evolution over several decades of, sports betting and figuring out ways to beat the number, and, power rankings and all the other stuff. So it's just been a fun hobby, I guess you can call it, but it's, it's becoming a little more than that, which is kind of a cool thing. So really love it. And, I like both of your guys' stuff, Ron, listen to you and Las Vegas Chris all the time, especially with the NFL stuff. And Tyler, when you have your stuff on VSiN, I should certainly check it out. I do subscribe to it. So a lot of people in the space, and it's been a lot of fun. I've met a lot of people, and I hope I can continue to refine my handicapping skills. I think it's still heading in the right direction, but doing things like this always, I think, helps you keep learning. Because if you're not continuously learning, you're not going to be successful. So that's in a nutshell where I'm at right now, and really over the last 30 plus years.
Yeah, even though I was in the woodwork and I still, not out there with a website and stuff like that, the brainstorming part is just so important. And the podcast even brought that out even more, just the networking and brainstorming. So what you guys do, you give out your opinions, you have different ways of bringing that information to more people. So it is much appreciated. And even though a lot of my process hasn't changed, there are going to be a couple of things that might change in the future. And that's why this topic is so interesting to me, because I've had a mechanical way of adjusting power ratings for years and years. And we'll get to something at the end that I want to bounce off the two of you even. So with that, the process that we're going to go through, the outline, we've had the introductions, we're going to have this process discussion, talk about making adjustments. Not every power rating is easy to move. This discussion will be real interesting because I have some examples, maybe Tyler and Tommy, you have some examples about where this power rating isn't right, and then how you adjust or what your thinking is there. some of the lessons that we've learned over the course of this year or in the course of however long we've been doing this. Touch on championship weekend. Games tonight, 3 games tonight. So that'll be interesting. And then some closing comments that way. So the first slide is really about what are the factors that are considered when you're even starting to go about, take the clock back to July and August of 2024 this year. Tyler, go ahead and start. What are the things that you're looking at in terms of making that definitive power ranking that you want to go into the season with?
Yeah, so I think this laid out a lot of great examples, and I think you could ask 50 different people and probably get 50 different answers on this. Personally, in my index, I don't factor in returning starters at all for a couple reasons. One, like now that we're in the portal era, it's not, I don't think, as indicative in my opinion, because it's much easier to plug holes than it used to be. And the other thing is, if a team was bad, but they bring back a lot of people, I don't think they should get credit for just bringing back a lot of bad people. And that goes both ways. So from that standpoint, I don't factor that in. I do. 247, thankfully, kind of makes my job a little easier with the transfer portal stuff, because they actually have their own rankings with that. So I do incorporate that to a degree into my preseason numbers. Coaching changes, I definitely factor in. So my preseason numbers, I don't subjectively do anything. Any part of my process. There's no subjectivity to it. The only piece that you could say there's maybe a little bit more art than science would be on these coaching changes and just giving benefit of the doubt or not, depending on how a coach or a program has performed in recent years. So, for instance, like when Lincoln Riley was going to USC, okay, USC had been mediocre, in the Helton era. So what I did is I looked at, okay, how has Lincoln Riley's Oklahoma teams performed? Kind of mix that with what's Oklahoma been, or what's USC been, and let's merge those together. And we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle there in his first year. So that's kind of my process. It's mostly based on what teams have done the last 3 years, which again, now that we're getting deeper and deeper into the portal and NIL era, that's going to become probably less of a factor. I'm going to have to kind of scale that down a little bit, because what a program did 3 years ago might not be very indicative, because they may have a ton of roster turnover and things like that. Colorado's an example, last year coming into the Dion era, where obviously I didn't just say, okay, well, Colorado sucked for the last handful of years, they're probably going to suck again. I knew there was going to be, I had to project that forward a little bit. So I do FCS ratings. So I did look at what Jackson State had been from a power rating standpoint, kind of mixed that in with Colorado. I was still a little bit low. I think a lot of sharper guys were lower on Colorado last year, whereas the public kind of hammered them all season and made some money on them. I think a lot of us were slow to adapt to them, but I think in a nutshell, that's kind of where my preseason numbers come from. Coaching changes, recent program history, and then projecting forward based on the recruiting and transfer portal rankings from 247.
Great. One question for you before we go on to Tommy. Do you find, because this was really the first year that I said, oh my goodness, I have to do extra work because of the portal. Mm-hmm. Did you find that it was a little bit more time consuming to go through that, to fine tune that a little bit?
Yeah. It wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, because like I said, now that 247 is doing, they have like a portal ranking, of the off season. And then they have their recruiting rankings. And then they also have an option where you can combine those two. So I use that combine feature as well. So that saved me a little bit of time as opposed to having to do everything separately. But you do also, you can't just, in my opinion, I don't think you can just take a transfer portal class at face value, just in a blanket sense. Like, okay, did they get a star quarterback in the portal? Quarterback in particular, obviously, is going to be a more valuable position that I think would impact a power rating more than did they get a couple tight ends out of the portal type thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I have more to say about that at the end because it's a transition for any team to undergo such drastic change. Tommy, what are your thoughts in terms of your process and how do you do this work in July and August to get ready for
Yeah.
that opening power number?
Yeah, it sounds like Tyler maybe shared his Google Doc with me with some of the things he touched on. I think the returning starter discussion is important because, yeah, I don't think it holds for my power rankings anyway. They don't hold much weight. I think a returning quarterback or a new quarterback that's strong will probably move the needle a little bit. But as far as returning guys, it doesn't get me too hot in terms of adjusting a power number positively, especially offensive line. I'm seeing in the offensive line area. I mean, you have your teams like Texas and other teams that return good offensive linemen, but I think there's a high variance there because you've got Florida State, Oklahoma State this year that supposedly were returning top 10 offensive lines. And I think Purdue also had a very high number in terms of returning minutes for their offensive linemen. And obviously that metric goes out the window, and it didn't happen only this year. I've noticed it the last couple of seasons. So I think when you're looking at returning starters, sure, if a team's uber talented and they're returning a lot of guys, that's a positive, obviously. But if you just see a team and basically click them up in your power rankings because they've got, eight returning starters on offense and 10 on defense, it's really not a good approach in my opinion. And also with the coaching, I think the coaching changes are huge. And, it's easy to say, obviously, with Cignetti and what Summerall's done at Tulane. He's been consistent keeping them doing well. But you look at a team like Arizona, you have Brent Brennan, who came over from San Jose State. Was he a good coach? Sure. But 7-win seasons. And, then he goes to the Big 12 and things fall apart. So I think it's important to look at those coaching changes. I'm interested in Fresno State next season. With Ertz going over there, he's a big North Dakota State guy. He had a lot of success there. Went to SC, kind of got his feet wet in Division I as an assistant, and now going up to Fresno State based on his past success. I'm going to be interested. That's not the end all be all, but those are there's a lot you look at, of course. But going off of what Tyler said, I think the returning starters and the coaching are two really big things for me anyway that move the needle when it comes to power rankings at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, obviously we could go into great detail, but this is helpful in terms of a lot of the stuff. And I agree with both of you. I mean, it used to be tried and true as recent as 3, 4, 5 years ago. If you had 5 out of 5 returning offensive line starters, you were going to be better just because the offensive line as a whole, as a group, gets so cohesive and they know where each other is going to be blocking and the schemes and so on. If you have no returning offensive linemen, that used to be a tremendous red flag. But now with the portal, you're getting people coming in that already have 25 starts, 30 starts, 40 starts. So even if they don't look good at the beginning, they have this experience, and maybe they even made all conference teams. So that's been an area that's changed a lot. Long-term coaches aren't long-term anymore. We had 32 coaches change last year. The average before that was about 24 per year. And this year we already have 20. And I think we're going to have more if Brocco Mendenhall, if that is coming true as well, where he's moving. So you got one moving here, one moving there. It's a revolving door. But I used to love guys like Bill Snyder of Kansas State. You knew he was coming back. You knew his system. His system was never going to change. And his win total was never going to change because he was always going to win because he was smarter than the other guy. He took those notes on the sideline and so on and so forth. I like that. One of the tricks that I use is because I have a bottom 5 coaches list. And when they leave, it's addition by subtraction. If you lose a bad coach and you get somebody in there, the team may have been bad or may have tanked or something because they weren't well run. And it just takes somebody like a Curt Cignetti to come in. Not that the Indiana coach made my bottom 5 coaches list, but there's a couple on this year, for example. Ball State coach was on my bottom 5 coaches list. So whoever they bring in is going to be an improvement. And it works both ways that way. Schematic changes have always been interesting to me. Georgia Tech went through a tremendous schematic change about 5 or 6 years ago, and it And that first year is murder when they go through that change. Now, it can be a little different these days because you could pick up a bunch of players that are familiar with the system you want to run. But if they're not picking up a lot of people in the portal and they're running a new system, that used to be another area that I would involve myself in. So that's a good discussion in terms of how you open that number. And so you have that number to start. You have a couple of months to look at those opening lines. Tyler, I know you're active. I'm active as well. I don't know about Tommy, but we're attacking those opening numbers.
Yep.
I have a lot of plays that first week.
Yeah.
What's your confidence level in terms of attacking week one?
I think each year I've gotten more confident as I've just become more comfortable with my preparation. I think I'm more confident early in the season to bet, full units and to have, higher volume. Whereas a few years ago, I was a little more gun shy because, I was just kind of figuring things out and kind of fumbling through the preseason process a little bit more. So I'm more comfortable now in my preparation. So I'm a little more eager to fire on some week one games, some win totals and things like that.
We haven't had this discussion, but you're also dealing with totals too. Do your power ratings at all work with your totals?
Not really. It's kind of two separate exercises. I was actually going to bring that up as you were talking about schematic changes, because I think as much as anything, it impacts totals. If you go from a run heavy team to an air raid team like that can cause a major shift in what your totals are going to look like. So generally, I mean, that's tough to quantify. You can try to look at similar teams in the past and kind of what their I have a metric in my numbers that I call points added, which is basically what I think a team contributes to a total. So then you take the team A's points added versus team B's points added, and that's my hypothetical total for over under for that matchup. So I look at things like that, but honestly, early in the season in particular, if I know a team has undergone a huge schematic change, I'm much more hesitant to bet their totals until I kind of have some data to really go off of.
Tommy, what about you?
Yeah, same way. Early on in the season, I don't get involved with totals too much at all for the very same reasons. I'm really focused, and I've had some success. Last several seasons, it's been like shot out the gate and then kind of came back to the pack a little bit with the early season stuff. And I think a lot of that has to do with the preparation, because you have several weeks and months to prepare. Then those early weeks go according to plan, but then injuries, travel, and all the nuances of the season when it starts kind of get thrown into the soup there, and you have to make those adjustments very quickly with opening lines and really over a few days of looking at where the lines move and how they come out and making a bet. So over unders and totals I do get involved in. Probably after week 3 or 4 I start looking at it more, so then you can really see what the offensive efficiency is for certain teams. You kind of have a good handle of where defenses are at, but as the season goes, I think those totals get I don't know if easier is the right word, but a little more, the picture becomes a little more clear with that in terms of totals in games, and just the offensive efficiency is something I look at a lot when I'm looking at totals. And I used to be a dead nut under player, but I've learned to get out of that. I'm a sharp guy. I just bet unders, not good. And over the last couple seasons, I've opened, expanded my horizons to betting more overs, and it's been well. You don't blindly bet them, obviously, but you create a system where you think you can attack a total, whether it's over or under, and the overs have been pretty good this season for me. So hopefully that continues. But as the season goes, I think obviously the totals get a little easier to attack.
So I'm going to bring up one more thing, and it's kind of a transition thing. So this comes into my preparation, but it also is a question that I want to make sure you guys cover when we make adjustments, because those people who know me on this space know that if I leave a topic without talking about special teams, something's wrong. I might not be feeling right. But I also factor in special teams. And I know you can't absolutely predict what a new kicker is going to do, but you do have information that the previous kicker went 27 out of 28, or the last special team coordinator was number 2 ranked at school A, B, and C, and now he's coming over and they're replacing a coordinator. Or at Nebraska, they didn't even have a coordinator for 5 years, and they lost all those one-score games. So as we transition to the next phase in terms of making adjustments, if you could also include kind of where you are at the beginning and the middle, does special teams even, do you have any part of your process that account for that? And then what other things, because Tommy, you just mentioned season adjustments, everything goes according to plan if you've done a lot of great preparation at the beginning, but how do you keep up? How do you make those adjustments when things go on? So we're on to the adjustment slide. Tommy, why don't you start off and talk about how you make adjustments?
Well, to me, I'm a big defensive guy. So my adjustments really, I lock in on how the defenses are doing. And what I found, I don't know if challenging is the right word, but there's been a little bit of a variance to it. You know, when you see a team that just using a basic stat like yards per play allowed, and you start seeing a team trending in the right direction with that, SMU is a good example of that. You know, is it real or is it fake? You know, who are they playing? The game situations. It's not always a clear, 100% crystal clear stat. But I still look at that, and what you have to do when you look at that stat, I've been very successful using it. It's helped me a lot, showing, you know, when I see a team trending in the right direction defensively, both, you know, with their secondary and stopping the run and all the aspects of defense, is, you know, over the last 3 or 4 games, 2 or 3 games, you know, their yards per play is trending down hard. But who are they playing? You know, is that defense? You know, is it a paper tiger? But you know, what I'm finding is whether they're playing a good team or bad team, those defensive numbers are real, and you can't really discount defensive numbers even when they're playing bad teams until proven otherwise. Doesn't always work out that way. So for me, as the season goes on, I really zero in on defense. You know, I mentioned offensive efficiency before. That's always important too. I really start holding my nose at teams that, you know, can't get it done in the red zone. I think that just kills point spreads when you're supporting those teams. So that's another key thing I look at. And during the season, it kind of evolves. It's really a coaching thing too. You know, how well they're doing, not only just scoring in the red zone, but really punching in touchdowns. You know, because there's a lot of teams that, you know, move the ball very well. Then they get on the 20, 25, 15, and, you know, they're settling for field goals. And then, Ron, as you say, with special teams, these college kickers, oh, it's so frustrating sometimes. So that's a thing in season that I look at is you know, the efficiency offensively and just how defenses are trending. Just to put it very simply, those are really 2 key things I look at.
Tyler.
Yeah, Ron, we've had the special teams discussion before, so you know my answer. I don't directly account for special teams. That's not a direct input into my model, but those my philosophy on that is that it's kind of already baked into the overall results of the game, you know, for better or worse. Now, I definitely factor it in terms of, like you mentioned, Nebraska, in terms of like my analysis of a game. So if my number indicates that there's value on Nebraska and they're a 2.5 point favorite, I may be a little more apprehensive to take them, because to me, like, special teams could swing that game 2.5 points, even though my number may show a little bit of value on Nebraska. So it definitely impacts my analysis of a team, but I don't directly input it into my number, if that makes sense. And then in terms of in-season adjustments, you know, I like everything that Tommy said about efficiency. I think is the most important thing. I think when you see graphics get thrown out there of like total yards leaders and things like that, I think that can be so misleading. You know, how many possessions were there in the game? Did a team, you know, you get a team like Ohio State that plays against even like Michigan, for instance. I don't know off the top of my head what the possession count was last week, but I know in general, Michigan would much prefer to have that game be lower possession, and Ohio State would much prefer that game to be higher possession. So yes, like in a game like that, Michigan wins the game. Obviously, Ohio State's efficiency that game was not very good. But when you look at the body of work over the course of, you know, we'll say 12 possessions a game, you would expect Ohio State's overall efficiency to be better than Michigan's, which is like obviously why they were a 20-point favorite in that game. So I week to week, especially early in the season, Ron, I think you make a great point here on the outline of you're considering increasing your adjustments early in the season. And I think in the portal era, I think that makes a lot of sense. In years past, I had adjusted my early season numbers more, basically getting off of my priors quicker and into the on-season or onto the in-season data much quicker. This year, I was a little slower to do that because I felt like even though it does sometimes put you in an advantageous position of maybe getting ahead of a team that's much better than anticipated or much worse than anticipated. It also, there are some teams, I don't like Georgia, for instance, especially in the non-conference, if they're playing bad teams, they may just coast and be playing backups a lot. So I think if you over adjust for those type of games when they're playing Kent State, then I think you do yourself a disservice when you're looking down the line, because your preseason number, your priors were probably much higher on Georgia, a team like that. So I think if you quickly downgrade them because they only won 42-0 against Kent State instead of 70-0 because they played backups the whole half, like I think that does yourself a disservice later in the season.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those are great points. If Georgia is favored by 40 and they win 28-3, there's not going to be an adjustment because the next game's probably an SEC game that matters to them.
Right.
So 2 points that I want to make, and I want to get your opinions on, that I've done for years and years and years, is that I put more weight on road wins than home wins. So, if you're favored by 7, you win by 7, and the box score analysis is not anything out of the ordinary. We didn't have 2 punt blocks, or we didn't have a fumbled snap for 33 yards or something like that. If there wasn't anything real strange, or turnover differential, because turnovers are so important in the game these days. If the box score was relatively whatever, it doesn't matter if they won by 7 or they at home or won by 7 on the road. If the game was lined at 7, there's not going to be adjustment. But I reward teams a little more for really winning by more margin than expected on the road than at home. And then one other point is and this is to what Tom said, defense matters to me, especially in this new age of everything offensive, TV, make sure that you have all this stuff, higher scoring games. So if a team wins 17-3, it's more impressive to me than if a team wins, 40-26 or something like that. Same margin of victory. But if somebody wins with a tremendous defensive effort, I have a mechanical formula that helps me with that. Comments on those 2 points, the road versus home and the defense.
Yeah, I do the same as you as far as accounting for the home versus road, even if it's the same margin. The road win definitely does get, or I won't say win because I don't directly factor in win-loss, but the road performance would,
I agree,
would get more of a nod than the home performance. So I definitely agree with that point. And what was the second thing?
The second thing had to do with the defense. Having scored 17-3 versus 40-26.
I don't directly or subjectively do that. I like how you said you have a formula that accounts for that. In theory, my formula does the same. I can't tell you specifically what tweak that is, but I think I'm under the same guidelines as you on that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, Ron, I think you make a good point with the road wins, because I was very active in using that. Good road wins is something that'll have me click a team up, but small sample size, and it's something I'm going to sink my teeth in more in the off season. I'm shying away from that just a little bit, and I like that you brought up that example. Being here on the West Coast, a little more. I know Tyler's talking about teams like Georgia and stuff like that out east. UCLA and Cal come to mind for me. UCLA went on the road. Early in the season got beat up a little bit, but they had wins at Rutgers. They beat Nebraska. They came home, then they beat Iowa. So I was like, wow, okay, great. These road performances are working out, because look, UCLA is getting Iowa now and they're beating them. But the wheels kind of have fallen off at the end of the season. I think the travel got to them. And the same goes for Cal. They went out to Wake Forest, they went out to Pitt, had really good performances there, and they haven't covered in their last 3 games. So, I think there's a more recent pop in terms of when they go on the road, they show they're doing well, especially now when you have West Coast teams going all the way out to places like Rutgers and things like that. But I think that travel starts to wear on them. So that's, I think, where the adjustment needs to be, you got to be quick on your feet, because I'm all with you. UCLA was a team that I thought when they got those road wins, they got Iowa at home. I go, you know what? They could probably win this game outright. They did. But then I think the travel caught up to both of them. That's a very small sample size, of course, because it is a metric I use as well. When a team goes on the road and gets a good win and plays good defense on the road, that really gets me excited about a team. So it's something I'm going to look at more in the offseason in terms of some of these teams that had good road performances, and see how they finished at the end and if travel affected them at all.
Yeah, and it's just a reminder that obviously power ratings are not only a snapshot in time, but it's one factor, and you have to factor in, well, what's happening this week? 3rd game on the road, they went here, they played double overtime. There's a lot of other moving parts. Before we leave this topic, one question for the both of you. This is the one thing in adjustments that I have a little bit of difficulty dealing with is injuries. I have trouble adjusting the power rating, and I've tended to kind of reset and say, if there's so many injuries, I'm just going to pass the game, circle their power rating. I'm famous for circling power ratings on 5 or 6 teams in any given week and saying, we'll see what happens when they get back at full strength. But I start kind of backing off rather than getting aggressive. Anything you have in terms of when injuries pile up, how do you feel about your process?
Yeah, so it's hard for someone like me that puts out publicly projections on every game, because I am forced to make a decision. So it is difficult from there, because then I get people like, well, why do you have this when this guy's out and this guy's out? So, and I'm honest with people. I'm like, look, I'm not going to adjust my number based on an injury. We're talking about college football. NFL is different. Pro sports are different. In college, I don't adjust my number for an injury, because then to me that's subjective, and then it's a slippery slope when you're doing something as rigid as what I do. So I don't adjust my number, but it definitely has to affect your analysis. And I think, going back to what you said a minute ago, Ron, I think that conversation could be a whole podcast of of numbers versus analysis in the handicapping process, because I think there's some gray area where people may get confused about the crossover there. I generally am just a numbers guy as far as the content that I put out. But then as I'm selecting my bets, of course, you have to have analysis on top of the numbers. I wouldn't encourage anyone to blindly bet my numbers or anyone else's, because there is context that I think you have to put around those numbers. And when the context matches the projection, then I think that's a great bet.
Yeah, I'm with Tyler there. And I think you become a better handicapper when you know which games to just take a step back from. And even to your point, Ron, regarding injuries and what Tyler said, I'm fortunate on my podcast. I only cover maybe half a dozen, 8, 9 games of my choosing, as where Tyler's got to, give an analysis of a lot of stuff. So I'm pretty fortunate where it's like, yeah, you know what, there's too much going on here with injuries and other things, storms and rains and 30-mile-per-hour winds. I'm just going to kind of back away from it. But I think injuries are very important. I don't know if this is maybe the correct approach, but it's my approach. Obviously, when you have a very high-end skilled position type of situations with injuries, you have to take a closer look. Like ASU's got their best receiver out. I'm still on ASU tonight. I'm not backing away from them. I think offensively they're still going to be strong. Whether they cover or not, I don't know, but it's not going to sway me. But in another game, Jacksonville State, in that Conference USA championship, Tyler Huff, their quarterback, can go. He can run the ball. and I like how he runs. He complements their running back very well, but their backup, Logan Smothers, is a very different type of quarterback. Tyler Huff is going to be a game-time decision. Based on the line, I think he's going to be in there. I like the over in that game, but I really don't like the over if the backup, Logan Smothers, is going to be in there, because it's a completely different dynamic to that offense. So, yeah, I think it's a case-to-case basis. I think in the NFL, it's a little more black and white in terms of, you've got injuries that pile up a little bit, whether it be on the line, skilled positions. You can kind of, especially a quarterback. But in college, yeah, it's much different. And for me, frankly, it's a little tougher to analyze injuries in the college game.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So moving on, we have to put out, we don't have to, but I assume we choose to set power ratings for 134 different college teams, including, unfortunately, no offense, Kennesaw State, who joined the ranks this year. And I'm saying, not another team. I'm getting older. I don't want, let's downsize a little or something. We don't have to bet all these games, but I'm telling you, when I set 134 power ratings, and I have a meticulous process, it takes like 36 hours to actually finalize these numbers once I'm really getting going and stuff. I'm certain that I'm not going to be right on all 134 power ratings that are up there. So this is the eye test. And we all have some teams that, when the power ratings seem too high or too low and stuff like that. So this particular slide talks about, and we may have some of the same teams. We know based on our start and end, which teams just completely went through the roof down or up. These are well-known teams. And then there are some other teams that bothered us or we learned to live with and stuff. So Tyler, take the lead, kind of address some of these areas, the eye test part of this presentation.
Yeah, and to me, for what I do, the eye test is where what we just talked about, the analysis versus the projection comes into play, because my projection process is very rigid, and I don't make manual overrides in any situation, just because, like I said, that's a slippery slope, and then the data gets muddy because I put my opinion on this one and not on this one. So my projection process is very rigid, but the eye test from an analysis standpoint, I'll get people asking me like, well, your number shows 5.5 points of value on this team. Why are you not betting them? I'm like, well, because I think that team sucks. So I don't think they're going to cover. So that's why Florida State, a good example. Now, I was dumb enough to actually bet them a couple times this year. I downgraded them 22.6 points from the preseason till now. And honestly, I don't even know if that clearly wasn't enough, because I bet them plus, I got a bad number, plus 15 against Florida, and they lost by 20. So I didn't downgrade them enough, and I downgraded them three full touchdowns. Missouri was another team. I was so high on Missouri in the preseason, and I bet their season win total over, and I downgraded them 19 points. They just did not do what I thought they were going to do this year. But yeah, from a week to week basis, it's basically after all these years, I've come to the conclusion that my numbers more often than not are going to be smarter than I am. So when I see a team and I'm like, well, that team, Florida State, Missouri, whatever, they're not as good as my number said they were going to be. Like, generally my number is going to bear out to be right more often than not. But in those two instances, my number was not right. My eyes were correct there. Purdue is another one that comes to mind. They got downgraded 16 points this year. But yeah, it's difficult. And that's where, there's no perfect process. There's no perfect model that's going to account for it, because like we talked about earlier, I think if you try to adjust too much too quickly, you risk a team kind of regressing to the mean one way or the other, based on where you thought they'd be in the preseason. So I think keeping those preseason priors in there is important. And over the long term, the majority of the time is going to be more predictive than trying to like phase out priors by like week 4 or something like that. But yeah, certainly there are teams that you just swing and miss on, and you got to just live with that.
Yeah, I want to interject something here before we go to you, Tommy, is that I used to, and I still mostly, if all other factors, situational and matchup factors, are considered equal, I tend to put a 1-star, my lowest star play, on power rating dogs, where I have a team that's 3.5 points or more different my power rating versus the public, the actual line out there. And it's been successful. But with power rating favorites, it hasn't been successful. It's been more 50-50, where if I have a team, I think they should be 20-point favorites and they're only 15-point favorites. That's not working out as well. And I do rolling 3, 5, 7-year averages on that. So I'm not as much betting blindly when my number is off. And it may be, to some of your points, these teams are going through adjustments, especially early in the season, as they get acclimated with the new faces. There's conference realignment, there's travel, there's so many other things. So there's a lot of moving parts. And sometimes we just have to let go of something that we have in our power numbers.
Yeah,
Tommy.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. There's a lot of examples this season. For me, it was North Carolina. I was pretty excited about their season, and I thought offensively they were going to be lights out. The running game never really materialized there like I thought it would, and it took me a little bit. Once that, whatever that score was, 70-50, that James Madison game,
Yeah.
that's when I finally started the downgrade. And they were just very inconsistent after that. And obviously Mac Brown's gone, and that's a whole other story. So there's always going to be teams like that, as like you, Ron, you mentioned, it's Oklahoma State. I started to worry a little bit after that Arkansas game. They were very lucky in that game. I had them there, and frankly, they had no business winning that game or covering. I think it was a 9 or 10 point spread. So, you can read the tea leaves a little bit with some teams, and obviously Oklahoma State went completely south. Arizona's another team that, I thought, based on their offense, the injection of life going into the Big 12, another one that didn't pan out. I wasn't too hot on them just because of the whole coaching angle that I talked about earlier. Their new coach came over from San Jose State. I didn't really get too excited about that. One team, though, that was, I think every year you have a team that's your darling that makes you some money, especially second half of the season. For me, it was Rice. I love their defense, and I just kept waiting. It's like these guys, this is a good defense. I saw some of it against the Tulane. They took Tulane to the limit for 3 quarters. They had the coaching change after some very bad offensive play calling, and voila, I think they failed to cover only once in their last 6 games, and things turned around, and that defense really did well. I think they hammered South Florida last week or the week before, whatever it was. So it's just one of the things of being on top of these teams. And like you say, there's so many teams now, and I'm not gonna pretend that I'm on top of 137 teams. I do the best I can to power rank them, but if I can't get to some of those, I'll take that back. Like the Kennesaw States, when you've got midweek games, you seem to say, okay, you know what? Let me dig into this team because it's the only thing going tonight. Let's take a look. So in those cases, you can do that, I think, with more regularity because the menu's in that evening, and you're trying to see if you can find something. But this year has been a little. Well, every year you get it, but you look back and you say, yeah, you know what? I nailed that team. I wasn't high on Purdue. Then you look at a team like North Carolina, you shake your head. You're like, wow, how did I miss so badly on that? So always teams that gain ground, always teams that lose ground, and you just have to be ready to hop on the train or hop off. Easier said than done.
Yeah, I know there's some teams I get a little too stubborn on that I stay with them a little bit longer. Yeah, mine were probably similar to you guys. I couldn't adjust mechanically Florida State or Oklahoma State's power rating fast enough. The eye test told me that Oklahoma State had quit. My power ratings told me I should be betting on them. Well, I wasn't going to be betting on them, but the problem was I didn't have a mechanism to bet against them because I was still so far off until the very last week of the year. Tyler, you mentioned 22.5. Florida State, I think it's a record, 24 points off my initial power rating for Florida State, 17.5 for Oklahoma State. On the positive side, even though I had a season win ticket over on Indiana, they still rose 17 power rating points for me. And buried in the Mountain West, New Mexico rose 13 points for me. I want to ask you guys about a couple of different things here. Syracuse was a very strange team. They went 9-3. If you look at their statistical profile, they look 4-8 to me. I mean, their run differential, everything about them looks 4-8, and they are 9-3. I looked at my plus and minus power rating throughout the year. They never changed from opening to close more than a point and a half off my initial rating. They still, at the end of the year, were just 1.5 points, the highest number of deviation I had with Syracuse. With a team like that, 9-3, was I off, or where are you on a team like that?
Yeah, I literally just talked about Syracuse on my Bets of the North show yesterday, and I just looked as you were talking. I from preseason to now, there's been a 0.8 adjustment positively for them, because I was relatively low on them in the preseason, I think, compared to where the market was. But I think from like a formula standpoint, it makes sense to me that there wasn't much overall movement, because I feel like the pendulum probably just swung way left and way right on them on any given week. So then when the dust settled, they were just kind of right back in the middle where they started. But yeah, that was certainly a team that was hard to get a grasp on a weekly basis. I mean, betting on or against them was just a roller coaster any time, just because. And I think that was just kind of encapsulated, like, just Kyle. That's the Kyle McCord experience. He can go out and throw for 350 yards and 5 touchdowns, or he can go out and throw for 175 yards and 3 interceptions. So, like, you just don't know kind of what you're going to get there. And so to me, that was just the perfect encapsulation of, like, they ended up basically right back where they started, because I think the pendulum just swung way left and way right with them.
Yeah, for me on the Syracuse topic, it was hard for me to get behind him. I didn't take a stance against him. I don't know if I even bet one Syracuse game this year. It was just that defense. The defensive metrics for Syracuse, every week I'd look at them and it's like, it's not there for me. And I mean, obviously that offense rolled along many a game, Miami too. So, and that's something I'll have to adjust on my handicapping to take those take the defensive blinkers on, I guess you can call it, and open up a little bit and say, hey, this offense is going to go. North Texas was kind of like that until they stumbled a little bit. I was okay with accepting their lack of defense, the fact that their offense was so good, but then they tailed off as well. But yeah, Syracuse was a weird one, and it was hard for. I think they're not even in the top 100 defensively, and to back a team like that consistently, for me and the way I do my power rankings and handicapping, very tough. But for those that rode with Syracuse, you made a lot of money this year, so I tip my cap to those folks.
Yeah, I was on the sidelines, but I wanted to get that perfect storm where I could just unload against them in one game, and I never had it based on the matchups.
Yep.
One more thing before we leave this and get to the tail end of our discussion here. There's a team for me that for years has befuddled me, and finally this year I learned how to embrace change. I don't know if you have a team like that, but this particular team, I'm not going to say it just yet, but when they were favored by 9, 10, 11 points via the spread and the power ratings aligned and stuff like that, they're supposed to be bet, they would lose by 5. And when they were underdogs, they would win by 12, 13. I said, I give up. And then finally I said, no, I'm not going to give up. I'm just going to say they're just the exception to the rule. If they're double-digit favorite, I'm going to fade them. If they're a dog, I may back them, and so on. This team for me, which finally started to make money for me, is Toledo. Their power ratings have made no sense for the last 5 years. So I don't know if you want to comment on the Toledo experience or add your own one team that defies gravity.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I'm trying to scroll quickly here to see if any team jumps out to me. I think Iowa maybe is kind of like that, where I bet them. I think I bet them twice this year as a favorite, and they failed to cover both of those. But when you bet them as an underdog, I think Northwestern, maybe not as much now, but under Pat Fitzgerald was kind of like that, where like, if my number likes them as an underdog, it's like, yes, you love to back Pat Fitzgerald as an underdog. When there's expectation and they're a favorite, you either hold your nose and do it, or just stay away because you just don't trust that they're going to be able to handle that expectation. For me this year, that was probably Iowa. I think Minnesota is a little bit like that. And maybe not that Toledo plays like this, but the trend here that I see is kind of a style of play. I think teams that aren't capable of like really hanging big numbers offensively are a little more dicey to bet as a favorite because they're much more comfortable just playing a rock fight game and winning by 3 and moving on to the next week.
Yeah.
So those type of teams definitely, even if the number indicates maybe there's value, you kind of have, again, the analysis piece, you kind of have to say, okay, does Kirk Ferentz really want to run the score up on anybody ever? Is he capable of running the score up on anybody ever? Not most of the time. So yeah, I definitely get what you're saying there.
Yeah, for me, and it was more of a profitable approach than anything, was Duke. Anytime that line was either way, and it's a really different example from Toledo, but I think it's in the same vein, Ron. Anytime their line was, and they had a lot of short lines in conference play, whether they were -3.5, +2.5, and those tight games, they always seem to come through. And I enjoyed betting them in those games. But when those lines got a little bigger, it seemed like Duke sometimes couldn't pull away or couldn't hang with, one of the very good teams they played. Miami was a perfect example. I still remember that sitting at the Superbook in Vegas, kind of, doing this kind of thing. Duke's going to not only cover this, they're going to win. And then the wheels fell off and Miami covered that. And it was kind of a wild game. So to me, it comes to mind Duke. But with the MAC, and I don't know if it's the variance of these weekday night games and the rest and how things kind of transition with those teams, with the Toledo thing. The MAC's just weird. The MAC, I mean, it's fun to bet, but it's just a very weird conference with how defenses show up week in and week out, or how they don't show up. The Toledo example is pretty interesting.
To that point, I had tweeted when the weekday action was getting started in November. I was like, man, I can't wait to bet an under on a total of 44 that ends up with 98 points.
Well
put. Embrace change up to a point, and then just ride with it. So we're in December now. We set our power ratings. We adjusted them. We've done all these things. The season's over, and there's always something. Boy, I got to look at this. I got to look at this, and so on. So Tyler, what do you think? How did it go? What changes? What insight do you have in terms of what did you learn during the year?
Yeah, I mean, I had a good year. I think I was up around 9 units this year. So not staggering, and that was largely due to a slower start. Really like weeks 4 through 6 were kind of rough for me, but the second half of the season was great. So I think applying some of those lessons moving forward, which more specifically is how I weigh or how I apply weight to recent games versus games that were 7, 8, 9 games ago as we get later in the season. Because teams definitely evolve over the course of the season. So I think weighing those data points evenly, I could argue either side of it. I think there is some value in having like a longer term stable number on a team, but also, you mentioned like Oklahoma State, who probably had quit on the season by, week 9 or 10. A team like that, I think weighing their recent games more heavily probably would help get you over the top.
Yeah.
When you're looking to fade a team, I think those type of things would give you data to support, what your eyeballs are telling you. So things like that, I'm constantly tinkering with how I apply weights to recent games versus the whole season versus still applying preseason priors. Like, do you keep those in to some degree throughout the season, or do you phase those out? And I kind of toy with that all the time. So that's still a work in progress.
Yeah, for me, more of a psychological thing. Accept where you were wrong earlier. Don't think, I still have conviction on this team. That can lead to disaster. And the Oklahoma State example, I know we've talked about it ad nauseum during our talk here, is the perfect one. I did jump off, but I lost a little bit of money on them. That Arkansas game I mentioned, I loved them against Tulsa, and they just blew the doors off of Tulsa, who's one of the worst teams in college football, in my opinion. But you get clues early on, and just because they go in and beat up on a bad team, it's fake confidence, and that's one where I should have said, great, they beat Tulsa. I remember what happened against Arkansas. I'm looking at their defensive numbers, still a little shaky here. Although I loved them before, it's like, you know what? I got to take a step back and see what they're really about before I keep trying to ride them. I think that's one thing that I have to continue to refine, is when to hop off the bus, so to speak, and be good with it, regardless of the result. Because more times than not, you are getting clues and waiting for a team to come around or catch up to whatever power number you have is a recipe for losing, for tearing up tickets. So that for me is one. Also for me, I come back to defense. Defense has made me money, and when I handicap this college football season, I'm about 57%. I'll have to take that. If you'd have told me in the beginning, are you good with 57%? I go, that's profit. I'll take it, because it's not easy. And we'll see what happens with the championship games here tonight and into Saturday. But I think for the advice I'd give any handicapper is, for me, my bread and butter is defense, and I really focus on that. And I've had success with really figuring out, this defense is trending in the right way. They're solid. They're for real. Or sometimes they're not. And that's really the baseline for me. Obviously, I look at offense. I look at all kinds of efficiency numbers, things like that. But I think keep refining that. I mentioned earlier in our conversation the fact that, defensive numbers generally are true. And again, don't get too hot on a good defense hammering bad offenses. A good defense is still going to perform. If they just destroy bad offenses, they're still going to be there versus good offenses. And if they're not, you'll know immediately. You'll know very quickly that, hey, you know what? This defense is a little fugazi. They had a little easy go of it. It's a hard thing to figure out. Army is one that comes to mind. Just strength of schedule was terrible. They had beat some just awful teams. And that Notre Dame game was one of my biggest bets of the year. There's no way that defense was going to do anything against a Notre Dame offense who's not, otherworldly, but solid. And I think the same thing's going to happen with Tulane this weekend, but we'll see. We can talk about that. So, yeah, I think it's just a constant refinement. And if you are having success, it's always good to tinker, but just try to focus on your strengths and keep refining that instead of looking for other new frontiers. At least that's my approach. If you're having success, build on that without looking for, going on a treasure hunt for new treasures, so to speak, when you're holding diamonds in your hand already.
Yeah, fantastic points by both of you. Do what you do well, refine what you do well. Don't step out of the box and stuff like that. My personal lessons is now that we've had 2 full years of this massive portal, and of course people are going in the portal as we speak right now, is getting a better grasp. I want to get a better grasp of how these coaches are dealing with such massive turnover. The Indiana example, they turned over the roster, but that coach turned over the roster with his own players. Mm-hmm. The James Madison experience, could they translate to the Big Ten? Well, he knew every one of those guys, and some coaches are going to be better equipped. They're just better with chaos, and some are not able to handle chaos. So I really want to look at the coaching aspect a little more. I need to, even if it's against the norm, because I've had such a good time with season wins over the course of decades or whatever, and this was a fantastic year, is that if I'm really down on a team, do not be afraid to take that opening number and make it a little lower than it needs to be, or if I'm up on a team, make it a little higher, because I've already I should be factoring in the fact that I don't like this team to begin with, and I don't want to be betting on teams that I have a negative opinion on in season wins. Now, there are examples when you have to pivot. I did mention Air Force, which was a team I started to get high on because there were like 9 new coaches in the Mountain West. And this one coach, Calhoun, he had 17 years of experience. Shouldn't that count for something? And then I looked at the box score week 1 against Merrimack, a team that he should have beaten, in the past. Actually, the score was 28-0 until the last play of the game. So everybody looks and says, wow, they really handled them. They gave up a last play touchdown. And I look at the box score and they run 55 times for 166 yards. That's 3.0 per carry. I'm saying that's not Air Force. This is a problem. And I was ahead of the curve there. I've got to find more places where I'm ahead of the curve. And then the last adjustment that I think I need to make is that for all the success that I've had this past weekend, every Turkey Day weekend, I seem to go 50%, 50%, 50%. And even though I started off like 4-1 right away or 4-0, I still ended up with a miserable Saturday and then I ended up 50%. So I have an internal clock to say, look at my power ratings, look at what I'm doing on Thanksgiving and see what I could do different next Thanksgiving. So those are my takeaways.
I brought that up on my show yesterday, Ron. The last 2 or 3 years, I have just gotten killed during these rivalry games, and I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know what it is. I can do well every other week, and then we get to that weekend, and my working theory is that there's bowl eligibility. Some teams have quit. Rivalry, motivational factors that you can't quantify. I think all of that plays a part where it's a little bit more art than science, which works against what I do, obviously. So, yeah, I'm with you. Next year, I'm gonna drastically reduce my volume, if not just stop altogether after week 13.
A lot of variance.
It's crazy.
A lot of variance
in
those rivalry games. The emotions and everything else, it does make it. That's a handicapping angle that's, tough to identify.
Now, I've been aware of that for years and years and years. So I don't, I trust my power ratings less that week. But still, going into Saturday, I said, this is the year. I'm already up. I've won all these Thursday and Friday games, and then Saturday turned, and I said, nope. Same Thanksgiving, same everything.
Yep.
Ron, you're fortunate. You said 50% on Thanksgiving. I've been 50% the last 3 weeks. So I'm hoping this week it clicks.
It's been a really good year. I'm not going to complain.
No, I know you've been doing pretty well. That's good.
I did complain last week because kickers got me last week and they shouldn't have. We had a question right at the beginning, and I appreciate all those who have been listening live, and I know some people will be listening after, but we had an SMU question. So it's championship weekend, and the question had to deal with SMU money line minus 130. Is that not a great situation? SMU to miss the playoffs are plus 360. So as you look at your power ratings, and we concentrate maybe on 1 or 2 games this weekend, we're going to wind down. I know we've gone a little bit. What are your thoughts on that game? Do you think SMU, if they did lose, would miss the playoffs? Is 360 a good number? What's your thoughts about that SMU game?
Yeah, I make it a pick 'em. So, I'm right at a even split. Literally 0 is the projection on that game. So I don't have a strong play either way. It would be tough for me to bet against Clemson just with their championship experience. I don't think Clemson's a great team. I think SMU is very good. A game like that, I think, is kind of what we just talked about, where like there's external factors I think that could impact that beyond the power rating, and to me, all those factors would favor Clemson. But that said, I don't have a bet on the game. On the spread, I did bet the over, but I don't have any strong opinions on betting that money line. I think to that point, though, if you think Clemson's going to win, then betting the SMU to miss the playoff, I think at plus 360 is a better value investment than just betting, Clemson money line or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with Tyler on that if you think SMU is going down, that plus 360 on the comment, I think is a very good play. Personally, I think SMU is one of the most undervalued teams out of the top 10 or 12 that you're looking at in college football. As a team I looked at, again, talking defense ad nauseum as I do, last year they had a very strong defense, very good defense, only one returning starter on defense, and that defense has come back and has just played very well. Clemson doesn't do well against good defenses. You saw against South Carolina, I think they're averaging right around 20 points a game here coming down the stretch. I don't know if that's going to be enough against SMU. And I say 20 points a game without the Citadel game in there. They blew the doors off of Citadel, obviously. But taking that game out, I think Clemson's right around 20 points per game. I like SMU here. I have them by about 4 on my power numbers, so I'm all in on SMU in this game. If this game was in Death Valley, much different story. I've seen enough games in that place where I back off if I'm looking at the other team, but it's in Charlotte, I believe. So it's a neutral site game. I think SMU, just the balance they have on offense and defense in this one. I think Clemson's name is getting them a little more play than it should, and I think it's SMU's time. I think they're very undervalued, and I think they win, and likely they cover.
Yeah, a lot of people in the space like SMU this week. I have the number SMU too, so I don't really see any value. This gets into objectivity versus subjectivity in terms of the plus 360 to miss the playoffs, because at this particular point, it's a beauty contest and you don't know what the committee is going to do. And if you want to get inside their heads and you have inside knowledge, then maybe you get an edge here. But if SMU loses 27-10 or something like that, they're probably in danger because they don't have the brand name like you said of Clemson, but SMU doesn't have Alabama on their jersey or doesn't have something else. So you get in a slippery slope if you try to guess what's going on in terms of that. Another question we had was on not a game this week. Well, it is a game this week because Penn State is playing Oregon. They have a chance to even be the number 1 seed overall. Penn State plus 300 to be the number 1 seed. Any thoughts on that?
I heard that discussed often on a couple of I don't know if it was the VSiN Live or one of the podcasts. I'd heard that discussed. I think the number's right, but I think a couple of things have to go the right way. Man, 3-1, I don't know. I if anyone's making that bet, I can see the logic to it. But just a couple of things need to fall into place, and I'd probably need a higher number to think that there's value there, but not beyond the realm of possibility that happens. I mean, I don't know what the money line is against Oregon State. I know the line's 3.5. I think it's stuck there. I've been monitoring that. If it goes any lower, I'll probably go with Oregon. I think I said Oregon State, Oregon. I think the line needs to be a little bigger. I think I'm looking in the background, Ron, on your banner there, but I think the number needs to be a little higher than 3-1 for me to think there's value there. But I wouldn't knock anyone thinking that there's that might be a play, because it could happen. They could end up the number 1 seed, which would be pretty incredible. But where everything lands now, it's possible.
Yeah, I think if Penn State wins the game, they are the 1 seed because they would have the best win in the country, and their only loss is to Ohio State. So yeah, I think that's definitely, if they beat Oregon, then they're the 1 seed. And the money line, the last time I looked, was Penn State plus 150. So you're basically doubling that. So if you think Penn State has a shot to win, that's probably worth a sprinkle, because I mean it's twice as good odds as the Penn State money line in the game. And I think if they win the game, they are the 1 seed.
Yeah, I agree with both of your comments there. I think there's value at plus 300. The problem is, for me, I think Oregon wins the game.
Yeah,
but if you're, but
Agreed.
Certainly if I thought it was a toss up, that plus 300 could be attractive.
Yeah, but the thing is too, again, you're extracting value. If you think Penn State's going to win and you're looking at a money line play, plus 300 sounds better than plus 180 or 160, whatever it is. So Tyler's point is spot on.
Yeah. Are there any other games this week where you say, wow, that doesn't match my power rating?
The only one for me was Arizona State, Iowa State. I make Iowa State -4 there, so I'm not sure. I didn't bet it because it was such a discrepancy that I'm like, I don't. It's odd that I have that big of a discrepancy at this point. So
right.
I didn't bet it just because perhaps there's something I'm not accounting for. Now that said, I will be looking live, like once I can get my eyeballs on who's on the field and make sure I have all the information. I may get involved there live with Iowa State, but I didn't bet it pregame. But that was really the only one to me that jumped out. I make Louisiana -8 against Marshall. They're -5.5. I did bet the Raging Cajuns there because Marshall's coach is about to leave. So, but those really the only two that really jump out to me from a difference in number.
Yeah, for me, it's Tulane. I have them at about 7 better. The line was creeping up to 6. I thought it was going to get there. Now it's all the way back down to -4.5. I started seeing some 5.5s out there. So there's some buyback on Army. Mildly concerned about that, but I still have Tulane as much better. It's the whole recency thing. They look terrible against Memphis, and I think a lot of people are looking at that game and thinking, now they got to go into Army. But again, the level of competition Army has played, to me, is not there with what I feel is a short number here at 4.5. So I do like Tulane based on my power numbers. Let's see. That one. And then I mentioned SMU. I have them a little higher than what the line is as well. Again, I just think they're a little disrespected, and I think they're going to beat Clemson. I think they'll cover.
One more game, because it's fascinating to me and it carries massive implications before we close up. And that's the UNLV Boise State game tonight. It's just fascinating that Boise State right now, we saw TCU and Boise a dozen years ago or so. They looked like they were closing out Ohio State, and then all of a sudden Ohio State is in the Final Four, and then Ohio State goes and wins it all. But right now, Boise sits ahead of the Big 12 champion in this game. But this is a tough test, this Boise UNLV game. They played a really dead even game the last time that they met. This one's on the blue turf at Boise. Any thoughts on this particular game?
I don't have a strong opinion either way here. I make it 7. So, I guess there is value on the number, but Boise is a team that I feel like my numbers have a little bit overvalued, particularly in the second half of the season, where I don't think they've been quite as dominant. So I'm out on that game. I am very interested to watch it, and I think it's two good teams, but I don't have a strong play from a betting standpoint on that one.
Yeah, I'm with Tyler there. I have them at 6.5 being Boise State. I will play them. I'm a little concerned. I'm taking a little too many favorites over the next 2 days, but the numbers are what they are. With UNLV, I think they had their shot at Allegiant Stadium against this team. I think they had their shot. They, frankly, in my opinion, should have won that game. Missed field goal, bad turnover late in the game. I think Boise's aware of that. The performances against Nevada and that performance against Wyoming is real. But if Boise State is fully cranked, they get up for this game. It's going to be in the low 30s out there. UNLV, the only team over 500 they beat this season is San Jose State, 7-5. So not that, Boise has played juggernauts either, other than that Oregon game. So I just think body of work, Boise, but, are they just coasting the finish line here? Are they out of gas? Gentie's been run so hard. Sometimes, in my opinion, unnecessarily. There's sometimes it's like, I think Boise State's coach has got a screw loose, to be honest. Sometimes that's good for them, but other times I just think, especially with the Gentie situation, he's running them into the ground. So we'll see. My numbers say Boise. It's not going to be a max play or anything like that, but I will be on Boise State tonight.
Yeah, it's really tough when you guys really hit it. They ran Gentie way too much, and he was only
got him banged up
33
too.
Yeah, he's come out a couple of games. 30 carries is the norm for him. 33, 128 last time he played against UNLV. One of the better run defenses he's faced. To be honest, Boise hasn't faced a lot of good teams that defend the run well. So, and I have the Big 12 teams, Iowa State and Arizona State, at least 3 points better than Boise in my particular power numbers. But I root for the underdog, so it would be kind of interesting in this new 12-team playoff to have a group of 5 team get that bye. So fascinating game tonight. I'm looking forward to it. I think UNLV, if they're going to win this game, they have to perform better in the red zone. 21 field goals is just too much.
Yep, they've killed some overs for me this year.
Yeah, it's true.
You guys have done a fantastic job. I really look forward to this show, and I hope it was educational to everybody who watches now and watches otherwise. Special thanks to both of you and the work that you've done, and I hope that people follow you and continued success. Closing comments from you guys. Anything you want to close the show with?
No, just a thank you to you, Ron, for the invite. This was great. Like I said, I hope everybody learned a lot. I know I did. So just, continuing to add tools to your toolbox, like we talked about earlier. I think the worst mistake you can make as a handicapper is feeling like you know it all and you can't gain anything from anyone else. I think that's a huge mistake. So I'm always open to hearing new perspectives and new ways of doing things. So, even if you don't take everything, you take bits and pieces here and there and make it your own. And I think that's what can make us as successful as we can be.
Yep, 100% agree with Tyler. Ron, thanks for having me on. And Tyler, was good, discussing this stuff with you too. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, don't think you know it all. This sports betting game will humble you quicker than you can blink. Keep learning. Build on the strengths that you've established over your handicapping years. Listen to people that you think have good opinions. And Tyler mentioned earlier in our conversation, you don't have to follow every play that someone comes up with, but take a look at it. Oh, that's interesting. Let me see what they're talking about there. Oh yeah, I see it. Good. And sometimes, yeah, I see what they say, but you know what? I'm still not on board. This isn't going to really work for me. Just doing that helps your handicapping a lot, because you're looking behind the curtain a little more based on someone's information or opinion, and it really helps you handicap better. Keep learning. Never think you know it all, because you never will. But what you can do to help yourself handicapping is just keep trying to acquire that knowledge. Find people out there that do have good opinions and give strong information, and build your repertoire that way.
Yeah, and as we said from the beginning, power ratings, it's just one part of the process. There's a lot of other moving parts that we all consider, but I'm sure everybody gets the impression of how much effort and how much work and how much discipline it takes to win in terms of the handicapping. And these guys, you could tell that they put in the work and the discipline, not only at the beginning of the season, but during the season, making adjustments. And so have that discipline for sure. Got another show coming up next week. I think I'm honing in on the details. Just like to do these process type shows. It's going to be talking about season wins, the season win market, and a similar process driven discussion on how to arrive at season wins, what our thought processes are going to be like, and how that plays out during the season. So again, thanks, Tyler. Thanks, Tommy. Thanks for everybody who's watched and listened, and see you next week. Good luck this weekend, everybody.
Good luck, everyone. Take care, guys.